Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're going to paint this semi-surrealist landscape. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials, as well as a link to our Art Monster Squad Facebook group, where you can share your version of this painting with me and our entire community. Now let's get started. To start out, I've already painted this background in a medium to dark gray, and notice I didn't worry about blending it or anything. This is just my underpainting so that as I'm doing the scrubbing that I'm about to do, I don't have to worry about having white spots poke out. If a little of this gray pokes through, that's okay because I'm going to be layering it in gray. I'm going to use my large scrubbing brush, and any kind of brush that you have that you're comfortable with scrubbing will do here. And I am using this brush dry. If I use it wet, it's going to smear the paint too much, and I won't get that foggy look that I want. So that's why I'm using it dry. So I'm going to start right up in this area because I want this part to be nice and bright, and then it's going to radiate out and get darker, but only to about this dark. I'm not going to go black on the horizon. So I'm going to get just a little bit of white, kind of tap it off. I don't want huge globs of paint. And then just the tiniest speck of black. You can barely even see how much black I picked up there. And I'm going to tap it into there too. And then I'm just going to decide where I want the brightest spot to be and kind of start scrubbing it in. And notice I'm just scrubbing my brush. I'm not trying to lay it down any way in particular or use my brush even any way in particular. And make sure you scrub the last section right up into that first section. Now I'm going to grab just a little bit more black. I'm going to start getting a bit darker. Maybe a little more than that. Once I've taken that color all the way around, then I'm going to go a little bit darker and all the way back around. But again, you want to make sure that you're continually scrubbing it into the previous section because you don't want a line. You don't want these hoops of dark bands. You want it to be a gradual transition. So if you get a spot that you're having a hard time blending, so like right there, I've got a line there, I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit of white, just white, and go right over that spot that won't transition. And now there's not a line there anymore. But so much of this is going to be covered up by our clouds that, you know, if there's a spot you really don't like, just make sure when we start doing clouds that you put your clouds over top of it. And scrubbing like this will probably be a good workout for your arm. And darker again. As I'm going out into these larger areas, I am picking up a little bit more paint than I was in the middle. And that's simply because I'm covering a larger area. If you're working in small areas, you want to pick up a little bit less paint because it'll be harder to spread it around with the look that you want. If you don't have a brush that you're comfortable scrubbing with, you can even do this with a sponge. Kind of either just blot the sponge or even scrub the sponge around on the canvas. Whatever you have to do to get the look you're going for. This is your painting. There's not a right and wrong. My way is not the only way that you can do this. Everybody does things differently. Everybody interprets art and what they're seeing and what they're doing differently. So it's perfectly okay for you to do this however you need to and however you want to. Just a little bit of extra white there to get rid of that line. And right here, it's pretty much the same color as the background that I have. So all I'm doing is just kind of going across it to fuzz out any lines that I might have from my brush strokes when I was laying down that color. I'm not worried about it covering all the way, just getting rid of some lines. And same thing over here. I'm going to take that same dark color. I'm not really going to go any darker. And I'm just going to fill all of this in. Now I've cleaned off my brush and I dried it off with a paper towel pretty good. It's still a little bit damp. And I want to brighten this up just a little bit more. So I'm going to come in and just get a little bit of pure white and just kind of blot it through here. I'm not going to scrub because I don't want to accidentally take this white out too far and end up having to repaint my whole background. So I'm just kind of tapping it in the middle and then kind of around it and bringing it out just a little bit. As I tap it, that paint will get less and less and I won't drag it out too far. But don't get a big white polka dot there. See, I'm taking it out pretty far, just tapping it, but you can barely see it. But it's just enough to help brighten the spot. And the amount of paint I'm getting is very, very little. And always stand back and look at it if you're having a hard time deciding if it's blended out enough. Look at it from a distance. Don't try and decide while you're standing right here in front of it. All right, let's let this dry completely and then we'll come back and we'll start our clouds. All right, our background is dry, so now we're gonna start adding some clouds. I'm using my next size down scrubber brush and I wet this in my jar and then dried it off on the paper towel really well. So it's barely damp, but almost not at all. So I'm gonna mix up a gray color, kind of similar to what I have in the background. And I'm gonna load up my brush with it, taking the paint about halfway down the length of the bristles. And I'm just gonna wipe some of it off. I don't want a ton of paint here, but I just want enough so that when I start scrubbing my clouds, this color helps me blend the bottom of the cloud in with the background. So I'm just gonna grab a little bit of white right on the end of my brush, not very much. And notice I loaded up with white on one side, but not on the other side. And it's this side that doesn't have white on it that I'm actually gonna put onto the canvas. And when I put it like that, it kind of rolls to the back. So I don't end up with a huge blob of white. And I'm just gonna lightly start scrubbing in some cloud shapes. It's not highlighting the end too much right now, but that's okay because we're gonna come back and add more highlights. Right here, when we get into the white, I'm picking up my brush so that it's just the very tip that's touching that lighter color. That's going to help get the illusion that the cloud is kind of disappearing into that distance. So I've got the full length of my bristle pressed down to the canvas. I except when I want smaller clouds, then I bring it up just a little bit. And really all we're doing here is blocking it in, so this may not look much like clouds just yet, but that's okay. Make them all different shapes and sizes. Some of them overlap the previous ones, some of them don't. Just don't try to get real regular shapes and patterns going on here. And you don't even have to start all the way from the edge of the canvas for your cloud. You can start kind of in here in the middle. As we move from the top down, the clouds are going to start getting bigger as well. So up here they're going to be quite small. Down here they'll be a lot bigger. So I'm just kind of letting that white get pushed into the top edge of the cloud. And notice, because I have that little bit of gray on my brush, see how I'm not getting a white line down here? It's helping fuzz it a little bit. Just get some really interesting shapes and movement going on in here. All of my clouds, I'm going to kind of have them almost like swooping in. So it's going to look like the clouds are almost like this, as well as the background. So I'm using the color I laid down on the background as the indicator for where I'm going to put my clouds and how they're going to move. And if you feel like your paint is starting to get too light on your brush from the white, just mix up a little bit more. Get it all the way down, at least half the length of those bristles, and just wipe some of it off. Now that I'm working with bigger clouds, I am laying down the side that I loaded the white up on. And that's because when you lay it down on the side that the paint is loaded up on, you're gonna get a heavier deposit of that color. So if you want a very light deposit of that color, use the side it's not loaded up on. I'm actually going to darken that gray on my brush a little bit because I'm working in a darker area. Now there's a million ways that you can paint clouds. So if the way that I'm showing you doesn't make sense, then don't do it that way. Experiment with it and see what you like best. Do what makes sense to you or what you like the look of best. Clouds are really fun because you can really do whatever you want with them. You don't have to make them look realistic. You can make them look completely fantastical. You know, give them kind of a mystical feel or a fantasy feel. Shape them however you want, because in the real sky, there's lots of different types of clouds. And just because you've never seen clouds look one way doesn't mean that they can't. This is art, not photography. Not to say photography is not an art form. I mean, this is painting, not photography. You know, there's no reason that you have to do something only the way that it looks in real life. You do it absolutely however you want to do it, and nobody can tell you that you're wrong. And I hope you know that if somebody tells you that you've done something wrong, or that you don't do things the right way, or that your art doesn't look like what you say it looks like, or just something in general that's mean, I hope you know that you are free to stand up for yourself. You know, just because somebody says something mean doesn't mean that you have to put up with that. You know, if somebody's going to say something mean about your art, stick up for yourself. But just make sure that you stick up for yourself in a way that doesn't bring you down to their level. You know, so if somebody says something mean to you about your art, don't say something mean back to them. Tell them how that made you feel, how their comment made you feel. As an artist, you will always have to deal with people who have opinions about what it is that you're doing and how you're doing it. And you can choose to let that devastate you and make you never want to do art again. Or you can take it as an opportunity to educate them on how saying things like that makes people feel. I just grabbed a little bit of my darker color and I'm kind of fuzzing out this bottom line here, because that might be as far as I want to go with these main clouds. I'm using very, very, very little pressure, just kind of dusting over that line a little. And I think I actually will do one more, quite large. Notice I picked up a lot more paint this time than I have before. I'm gonna get a nice large cloud right in here. But still releasing the pressure on the end of my brush here and kind of scooting it to let it trail off. Just a tiny pinpoint there. And let's get rid of that bottom line. I'm gonna mix up a color that's very similar to that background color. And again, just dust over. I'm barely touching the canvas here. Barely, barely touching. So on my plate, can you see it's just the very tip of the brush? And notice how much paint I'm depositing there. Not very much. And that's all because of the pressure that I'm putting. So that's really what you're looking for. You're not looking for that. You're looking for that. That's going to help you get rid of that line without creating another one. Just like with any brush that we're using for any technique, heavier pressure lays paint down, light pressure blends them together or softens them. Okay, I think that's good. I'm going to go and do the same thing over here. Actually, I'm going to lighten up this color on my brush just a little bit, since the color I'm working in right here is lighter than it was over here. Just a teeny bit on the tip, just because I'm going to be doing smaller clouds here. This painting is actually based on a larger one that I did a couple of years ago, and it was one of my favorites. And I showed it to you guys in the Facebook group, in the Art Monster Squad Facebook group, and everybody really liked it and said they wanted a tutorial of it, so that's why we're doing it. I never considered doing it before because I thought it might be just a little bit more challenging with the clouds and all, but you know, a little challenge never hurt anybody. Even if it's above your skill level, it can still be really helpful to you to try things like that. You can learn a lot, I think, by painting above your skill level. I mean, that is as long as you don't let frustration take over. You know, it can be really frustrating to do something that you're not ready for. And if you let that frustration make you not want to continue, then for sure that that's not a good thing. But if you go at it with the attitude of you're just going to try it, enjoy yourself, and try and learn something, then I think painting a little bit above your skill level is quite a helpful thing to do. One issue with being, either right-handed or left-handed, doesn't really matter, is that if you're trying to do something on one side that you've done on another side, sometimes they end up looking a little bit different. So I feel like my clouds on this side look a little different than the ones on the other side, but that's okay because I haven't added highlights yet, especially to these ones. These ones I feel like have more highlights than these ones. But that's because my hand on this side turns this way, but on this side, to get clouds that go this way, I have to turn this way. So, that's something that everybody kind of deals with. So if you're struggling with that, just know it's not you, you're not alone, and you'll figure out how to make that work for you. So see, I do have to kind of scrub to this side a little bit over here, but I try and make myself do it to this side too. Let's bridge this gap here just a little bit. Kind of bring this over, almost like these are starting to lace together. One thing that was really interesting for me with this painting when it was hanging in my gallery was everybody had different interpretations and reactions to it. Some people thought that it was really a sad or depressing painting. Some people thought that these clouds were closing in, while others saw it as a little bit more of a hopeful type painting, and like the clouds were parting. And I would never tell someone they were right or wrong in that. However somebody sees art is, if it's a sad painting to someone, then that's right. Viewing art is just as personal as creating art. Everybody sees it different and interprets it different and is going to feel differently about it. And ultimately, that says something about them, not necessarily the artist. Okay, I'm going to let this dry again, and when we come back, we'll start amping up the highlights in some of these and maybe add just a few more little distant detail clouds in here. All right, now I'm going to go down to a little bit of a smaller scrubby brush, and really at this point, it doesn't matter what you use. If you want to use a small filbert or even a round brush, whatever you have. I'm just using this one because it's a little bit smaller. I'm not really going to be doing the same type of technique. I'm almost just going to be kind of blotting the highlight in where I need it. But I did wet it in my jar and then dry it off really well on my paper towel again. I'm going to start with these teeny little clouds up here. So I'm going to come into my white and I'm just going to pick up a tiny, tiny bit, not very much at all, and just kind of start blotting it on to insinuate where I need those cloud tops to be. If you get a spot that's too bright, you can scrub at it for a second or even blot it with your finger. The important thing right here as we move into this bright spot is you don't really want your clouds to be much brighter than this spot, because that's going to help it seem like this is really bright and it's overpowering the clouds and fading them into the background. So just teeny tiny amounts of white. Again, just using the very tip of the brush so I get very small lines. And this part might take you quite a while, so don't try and hurry through it. Spend as much time as you need to. I think that painting clouds like this can be really meditative. It is for me anyway. I kind of get into a zone and lose myself for a little bit. If you feel like you got too much white, just take a little bit of a damp brush before that dries and just lightly swipe over it a little to bring back some of that dark underneath. I'm just kind of tapping it. If you get a spot you really hate, just add another little cloud over top of it. You can hide anything in here. And again, as my clouds get larger, I can use a little bit more paint, maybe put a little bit more pressure on my brush. But remember, since your light source is here, you wouldn't really have too much bright highlight on the back side of a cloud, but it would be more along this side. And that doesn't mean that you can't have any on that side, but the concentration you want on the front side. Just take back that little spot with my damp brush. I'm going to push the edge up just a little bit there. I'm going to zoom you out and probably throw you into time lapse here while I just highlight all of these. Still down here, even though these clouds are bigger, I'm just using the very tip of the brush and just kind of tapping and scooting that paint that I pick up in. Always feel free to use your finger to tap it out, to spread some of that paint around or soften a line. And make sure that these edges are really irregular. Unless you want puffy, rounded edges on your clouds. They're your clouds, you can absolutely do that. And just lightly tapping with a slightly damp brush there to soften that. And don't think of the highlights on your clouds as always having to be right on the top edge, because clouds are very three-dimensional. They're not flat that only have a top edge. They have all kinds of billows inside of them. So you could even come in right here and say there's a little puff of a cloud right there. Or maybe you start on the top edge, like, let's see, right here. So I'm gonna say I'm starting on the top edge here. And if I follow it with my eye, that edge comes down right here. But maybe I don't wanna bring it all the way through there. So I'm gonna bring it down some and bring that edge here below it. Same here. I'm gonna kind of cut it in there and have it meet up with that spot. Let's keep going with just a little bit. Very, very, very light pressure. And just get some little ones down in here, just kind of scoot it in a bit. Just kind of little, either they're distant or they're just kind of tapering off. Just wherever you feel like you have a little bit of a hole and you need something else going on in there. Just a slightly larger one here that's going to trail off into nothing. Just kind of dusting out that line, and if I pick up some of the white and it smears below, I'm dragging that over to help give another insinuation of just a little more dimension, or maybe a little fuzzy bit of cloud that's escaped from the main cloud. What I want you to do when you're painting clouds is experiment, lots and lots of experimentation. So if you're doing it the way I'm doing it and it's not working out for you, then don't do it this way. I want you to get a different type of brush and try it out that way. See if you can figure out a way that works best for you. You know, when I was first learning how to paint clouds, I looked at so many different types of paintings of clouds, and I watched people paint clouds and tried it out the way that other people did it. And sometimes the results were okay, and sometimes they weren't. And so I would just kind of take what I learned, you know, what didn't work for me, what worked okay, and all of that, and I put it all together and just started doing it my own way. And that's exactly what I want you to be doing. In no way should you get frustrated if you're trying to do clouds the same way as me and it's not working. That just means that this technique isn't for you. Try it another way. Because I can almost guarantee there's an infinite number of ways that you can paint clouds. There's not a right way and a wrong way. All right, I am done with my clouds. Now we are gonna lay in the base for our ground. All right, so I'm gonna use this 1/2" flat brush, wet it in my jar, and just wipe the excess off on the end. And then whenever I feel like I need more water, I'll just do the exact same thing. Get a little more and wipe the extra off. I'm just gonna load up with burnt umber. Now burnt umber isn't gonna show up real well here, but this is just the base for my ground. So I'm gonna use the edge of my brush and just draw out where I want the ground to be. I'm gonna have it sit fairly low, and it doesn't have to be straight. You can even make some intentional dips and maybe a little hill intentionally. And then just fill it all in. All right, now I'm gonna let that dry so that when I start layering the highlights and shadows over it, I don't remove that paint and expose the background again. All right, so now I have a little bit of yellow oxide and a little bit more titanium white. I'm gonna stick with my 1/2" flat brush, but you can use an angle brush or whatever you're comfortable with. Now what we're gonna do in here is insinuate some light and shadow, and that's gonna give our ground some movement. So my light source, you can't see right now, but it's up here, and I feel like it's kind of moving this way. So right here in this depression, right in line with that light source, is where I'm gonna put the brightest part of my ground. And to make this ground not look flat, some of my brush strokes are gonna go upwards a little bit, some will come down, some will be flat, and that will give us a sense that this is kind of a rolling dynamic ground rather than just flat. So I'm gonna start with some yellow oxide and just load it up on my brush. And I'm really only gonna be using the end of the brush, not flat, but here and there I may use it flat. So I'm gonna start back here on my horizon in my brightest spot and just start laying in some little streaks of color. Notice I'm following the shape of the hill here in the back. And once we start getting some other colors on, that's going to help with that sense that the ground is not flat. You can even curve it a little bit right there. And just kind of bring it wherever you want to, kind of play with these shapes. And then as I get forward, I'm going to have this bottom area be darker than back here. So I'm going to start grabbing a little bit of my burnt umber. And I'm not blending my colors in, I'm just streaking them together. But if you want more of a smooth blended looking ground, then you can use the flat part of the brush and make sure that you get those colors really blended. And any of this can change at any time. I may decide that I want a hill or a depression somewhere, and it doesn't matter if I started out with it one way or the other. I can make those changes as I need to. So this is another area where you can really experiment with what you're doing. If something's not working out, do it a different way. I'm going to keep a little bit of the gold up in here, because I don't want it to be totally dark everywhere except in the center. And just pick up a little bit of a different color combination every time I go back for more. Now let's start brightening up that horizon. I'm going to grab a little speck of white and mix it in there. And I'm going to keep this brightest color at the back here. Use very light brush pressure, because as it gets farther in the distance, your little streaks would be smaller too. And then down here closer, they might be a little wider, so you might put a little more pressure on the brush. Let's get some of that brown off of there. Get mostly yellow oxide and some white. Trying to keep a pretty true yellow gold right here where I'm trying to blend that lighter color into the dark. Just like with the clouds, spend your time here and make it exactly what you want to see. And I cleaned off my brush, and I'm going to grab just a hint of black and mix it in with some brown. Get a nice dark brown. We're going to come across the bottom edge here and start getting some of these shadows in there. Just use some solid burnt umber to streak it in. Even add just a little bit of that shadow color very, very lightly right in here. Helps give the impression that there's a depression in the ground there. Now I'm going to use a 1/2 inch angle brush, and we're going to put a creepy tree on it, because that's how I roll. And I'm just using black. My tree is really secondary to everything else, so I'm not going to put too much detail into it. I'm just going to start down here. Remember to always drag the tip of the angle brush and bring it up into some kind of shape. I don't really know what I want this tree to look like just yet. I'm just going to kind of go with it and see what happens. Go down to a smaller round brush and get some detail branches in there. And we can extend the top of these ones a little bit. Make sure to keep a little extra water on your brush, because that will help you get nice, crisp lines. And it's all about pressure here. So if your branches are wider than you want them to be, just check the amount of pressure that you're putting on the brush. If you're putting too much pressure, you're going to get a fat line. And give my tree some little elbows. Make him a little bit creepy. Your shape of the branches that you make is what's going to give your tree the personality. So my tree's branches are kind of growing up. They have a little elbow and then they trickle back down. So to me that says that this tree is kind of, maybe it's kind of in a sad way. It looks like kind of a dry desert area. So maybe he just hasn't had a drink in a while. But maybe this is a hopeful painting because those clouds seem like they're either about to bring some rain or maybe they just did. So maybe our tree's gonna get a drink. But if you want a happy tree that's just reaching straight up into the sky, that's perfectly okay too. I'm of the opinion that not everything has to be painted beautiful and happy. And not everything that's painted creepy means something sad to the person who painted it. Like I said, I feel like this painting, it feels hopeful to me, even with our creepy, sad-looking tree. Maybe he's not dead. Maybe it's just after fall and his leaves have fallen off. And in the summer, maybe he has little bright pink blossoms all over him. Just have lots and lots of patience while you paint him and let his own personality come out and do what it wants to do. I think over here on this opposite side from the tree, we're gonna add just a teeny little farmhouse. So I'm still using my little detail brush. And we're gonna do this very, very simple. Remember, hold your brush like a pencil. Hold it right there at the end. Put your hand on the canvas like you're drawing. Don't try and hold your brush back here with your arm floating. You're not gonna be able to get the lines that you want. So I'm gonna come in here and just draw a very simple little farmhouse in the distance. Maybe we'll give it just a little simple window here. And fill it all in with black. Maybe hanging out right next to the house is another very small, simple tree. And I'm gonna use this little liner brush. It has a super sharp point. And if I just put the smallest amount of pressure on it, I can get a very small tree with razor thin branches. Zoom in a little closer there so you can see this because it's so small. We're gonna get some little branches on there that are not even as wide as a human hair. Maybe we'll have some little grasses or shrubs kind of growing up here, just barely. And we'll give it a little chimney, just a super short one. Let's come back up to our sky, still using that same teeny tiny brush. And we'll draw a couple of birds flying in from the distance. Just a simple little V. Maybe this one is down like he's got his wings flapped down. And we'll put another one over here with his wings just a little more outstretched. You know what? I think maybe they're flying in over here to meet up with their friend. He's just a simple little guy, and he's just hanging out here waiting for his friends to come in. And then I'm going to sign up. And there's your semi-surreal, dreadful sky. I hope you enjoyed painting this with me, and I hope you challenge yourself to take time to work out the very small details, to figure out how to do things the way that makes sense for you, and also to really just open yourself up to being open to what happens in your painting, and not always trying to make things be perfect or look exactly like something else. Art is about creativity and the way you see the world and the way you communicate that to other people, but it's also about how other people view your art and interpret the world through that. There are many, many facets to art. There's not right and wrong, there's how you do it. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and maybe share it with a friend who you think would like it as well. If you haven't yet subscribed, please make sure that you do so that you can paint with me every week. Also, make sure to check out the video description below for links, information, as well as a full materials list. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter on my website at paintingwithjane.com. And thank you as always for painting with me, everyone. I'll see you next time.